Over the course of a year, I, as an autistic person, trialed medical marijuana as a potential remedy to my long standing depression. Medical marijuana is often the subject of controversy, a lot of controversy, especially in the UK, and I regret to say that this video will likely not do it any favours. I went from literal highs to the lowest point that I've ever had experienced. I made fairly extensive notes on my experiences with different strains, methods, from sativa to indica, from drops, vapes to dry herbs, and I think you'll be surprised about my conclusion. Safe to say, I'm not a doctor, and this should not be taken as medical advice, but today I want to take you through my experience with the positives and negatives to using medical cannabis as an autistic person. I first came across the idea of medical cannabis in the form of CBD. I remember visiting a local vape shop in Manchester at university and trying out these sublingual drops as a possible remedy for my anxiety. I didn't really see much effect from it, and it was only until a few years ago that I returned to it in its dry herb form, which I actually noticed a noticeable effect on my anxiety. However, it was still only till about a year ago that I signed on to a medical company which offered THC heavy strains of cannabis as a treatment option for my depression. Clinical depression, also known as major depressive disorder, affects around 1 in 6 adults in the UK at some point in their life, with autistic adults being significantly more likely to develop this. Some reports show that around 40 to 50% of autistic adults struggle with depression and anxiety, so it's a little bit more common in our population. As somebody who has tried 4 antidepressants, even transdermal electric therapy, I was desperate to find an alternative to the relatively more extreme treatments like ECT or ketamine therapy. There were 3 main things that I wanted to get out of using cannabis, and the big one, number 1, was my experience with anhedonia, that difficulty feeling pleasure that's very common to depression. I generally find it very difficult to even enjoy the simplest of things, and I was expecting that marijuana would help me with this. Number 2, I wanted a notable alleviation to my mood state, going from feeling like there is a rain cloud over my head to at least having sort of a clear day. I wanted to feel neutral. And number 3, to enjoy socializing and communication a lot more, something I know a lot of autistic people can relate to me on. I was hoping that the treatment of these symptoms would aid me in being more motivated, focused in my work, and increase my enjoyment in making videos. So, let's talk about what actually happened. The first month, I used a CBD THC mixed tincture, those sublingual drops, that although made me quite sleepy, likely due to the CBD, I actually started to find music a lot more enjoyable, and I could do that to the point where I just lay down and listen to it, something that's very strange for me. I felt mildly dissociated, but my concentration was pretty good, and my anxiety did increase, but I think that was more due to the worries of going on to a new medication, especially cannabis. I noted that I was a lot more aware of my thought processes and felt a lot of appreciation for the work that I did that way. And it wasn't unfounded. I just usually don't feel good about what I make, and it helped me feel sort of a sense of pride to what I did. Waking up the next day, I felt a little bit more sluggish than usual, but I was excited to trial some more. The problem I ran into very quickly was that the tincture just didn't really do it in terms of dosing. So the next month, I ordered 10 grams of 26% THC indica flower and a balanced vape cartridge after, of course, a consultation with the doctor. I did note that this brought me a mild sense of paranoia, but it was quite easy to dismiss. But the anhedonia was definitely no longer a problem. In terms of the downsides, I did find I was being a lot more forgetful or silly which was strange as I'm quite used to being switched on. I found transitions from one thing to another a little bit more difficult than usual, and I noted that it did exacerbate my anxiety just a tad. Being on it at the gym was a strange experience too. I felt like generally my interoception was a lot higher. I could feel the movements more, the contractions, and I even felt some pain relief in my joints, which was quite useful. I didn't really get the munchies, as people call it, but that increased interoception, being aware of my bodily signs and things that are going on, definitely made it a lot more apparent that I was hungry. So I could tell when I was getting a little bit hungry or moderately hungry, which is quite a new experience for me because it just tends to come out of nowhere. However, I didn't really feel much better mood-wise until I upped my dose a little. I felt a lot of euphoria, something absolutely foreign to me, and weirdly, it upped my emotions to a point where it helped with my alexithymia. If you've watched my previous channel or know of me, that I like to talk about it a lot. Alexithymia is a difficulty noticing and categorizing emotions. It's something that a lot of autistic people experience. A lot of people with PTSD also experience this. And it generally made things in my life a lot more clear, my emotions a lot more clear. I felt my emotions through a new lens and spent a lot of time thinking about things like the love that I feel towards my family and friends like I never had before. And it truly was a wonderful thing to me. In December, I started dosing specifically in the evening, and I found that using my CBD flower in the little vape thing that I had really helped give me that body relaxant effect, which was massive for my anxiety, as I mostly experience anxiety symptoms in my body and my legs. I found it made my sensory tolerance a lot lower than usual, which made it quite difficult to be outside without my headphones. And at one point, even the sound of my voice triggered me, which was quite strange. So it definitely didn't do any favors in the sensory overwhelm department. The smell of the flower was obviously quite off-putting too. It was quite difficult to prevent it from stinking up my room. And I found that the whole act of vaporizing the herb was very tedious, and I didn't like the taste either. By the end of December, I had my dosage down to a T, I was very aware of what I could tolerate and when I could have it. Although the winter months were getting me down, as they usually do, it was prime time to see if it had any type of social effect on me, and it really did. I learnt about a THC oxytocin mediator, oxytocin being sort of the love and bonding hormone. And I learnt it on a podcast that I did with Dr. Miyabi Shields, a cannabis researcher who noted that THC-rich cannabis often helps people enjoy socializing a lot more. And I definitely found this when I went to a Christmas party. My emotions were more intense than usual, so were my sensory experiences, but I found that words flowed from me a lot easier, and I was a lot more animated than usual too. In January, I decided to take a break from marijuana, honestly, because I felt I was doing something wrong for using it, even though it was prescribed medication, or that I was wrong for having a little bit of emotional dependence on it too. That sense of shame, I think, came from the legality history in the UK, as it's only recently that medical marijuana has been legalized to be prescribed in the UK. However, when I did return to it, I came at it with a fresh new perspective after looking at the various terpenes and their effects, these sort of volatile, smelly compounds that, generally change the action of the marijuana or any system. It makes the effects differently, basically. I found one strain, an indica hybrid, that had a very large concentration of linalool and limonene, two terpenes that I wanted to test considering their anti-anxiety and mood-boosting properties. As I said, terpenes are these volatile compounds, and they basically they also lead to the taste and the smell of it, and the way that THC actually works on your brain. This new strain, high in linalool and limonene, I found was the most effective, finding an immense amount of alleviation for my anhedonia, and a lot of enhanced concentration too. My enhanced concentration did have a positive and negative effect, depending on what I concentrated on, meaning that sometimes it made me a lot more unproductive than I would have wanted to. It's really the case of what you focus on. I noticed that I had a lot more anxiety and restlessness with this strain, however, but I managed to balance it out with my CBD THC pen that I was prescribed. Most of the anxiety I felt around this time was socially around other people, which makes sense because there is some links with isolation and marijuana use. But it did make the actual act of socializing more enjoyable. I was sort of worried a little bit about my communication blunders and people's social perceptions of me being high, and so I think that's what drove a lot of the anxiety for me. But on my quest to find the best combination of terpenes, I tried out a particularly limonene heavy strain, the lemon one, which was my first sativa hybrid strain. I felt very uplifted mood-wise, finding a lot of beauty in things like the daylight, my surroundings, which was quite a rare experience for me as a depressed person. However, it definitely made me a lot more energetic, with very minimal effects on like my body and how anxiety felt in my body. It made me unusually silly, social, and giggly, giving me a lot of physical energy, which had me dancing and shadow sparring in a lot of situations during the day. I felt more motivated to move and do things, which makes sense because the strain was listed as potentially helping with ADHD. Overall, I found most of the reduction in my depression score came from the enhanced ability to feel pleasure and the subsequent motivation to find that pleasure. Being depressed is often miserable, as you don't only just feel awful, numb, and empty, but you also find little enjoyment in things. Using marijuana gave me a healthy appetite for enjoying and appreciating the small things, the large things, and even my work process for creating videos and streaming. The linalool terpene, the one that I like the most, gave me a sense of peace that I'd never experienced before. Myrcene helped me with my physical experience of anxiety, and limonene helped me feel more energized, motivated, and socially giggly. However, I did say that there was a bad ending to this, and sadly, I did have to discontinue my use of marijuana due to a psychotic breakdown that I had. In my adventures to try and find the best strain for me, I received a sativa strain with a very high dose of THC, which, alongside social media worries, caused me to spiral down into one of the strangest and most horrifying experiences that I've ever had. You can see that video at the end if you like. I immediately discontinued my use, of course, after noticing that I was acting differently about 3 to 5 days into the use of this new strain, and I was plunged into a series of terrifying delusions and hallucinations where I was in and out of psychiatric hospitals for over 3 months. I lost my grip on reality for a long time, deleted my YouTube channel of over 30,000 subscribers, and my Instagram of over 50k followers, and pretty much just erased my online presence overnight. So, whilst marijuana helped me get back my desire to socialize and to enjoy life, it was also a catalyst for destroying a lot of what I spent my life building over these 8 years. Marijuana-induced psychosis is a reality, and whilst me and my doctors still don't know what the root cause was of my episode, they do tend to be more acute in nature, and it's clear that it did exacerbate the experience that I had. It's been difficult following the recovery of my psychosis, not being able to medicate myself through this depressive episode. I find myself very painfully boring and empty situations. However, one thing is clear to me, that the medical system is starting to take my mental health more seriously, so I'm hoping that this extra help will help me get to a more happy and fulfilled place. Having treatment-resistant depression is awfully demoralizing, and marijuana, I can say, generally gave me relief from my symptoms, but I would like this to remain a tale of caution. Thanks for listening.